So thank you so much once again, Paritesh Royalji, joining us from Delhi at this point of time, and it's a wonderful possibility for us to have people like you from different domains and expertise. That's the reason you're on board with us. You are a practitioner lawyer, and at the same time, I would like to also mention that you studied your master level studies from the UK, and you've got tremendous international experience and research experience also. At the same time, you've been trying to push forward a lot of other things. Today we're picking up a wonderful topic, which is like almost like advocates beyond boundaries. What does it mean to be an advocate beyond boundaries?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for introducing me and taking me on board. The question that you have asked is very simple, that you have no limits and there's no jurisdictional boundaries that you have when you advocate for people or advocate for countries, advocate for the issues that you have, which is beyond your own country's territorial boundaries. Now, if you look into it, it's more simple to say that like there had been issues where Indians were facing a problem in the other country and India could not interrupt just because they had their boundaries. And there were some limitations on the legal, the aspects that they were looking into. So over there, we people like, the lawyers who have no boundaries, who can understand the international law, who can practice international law and give some consultation or be on board with the lawyers over there.
It's an important concept to know, as we also come across doctors beyond borders and have no limitations. Certainly, advocates also beyond boundaries, they have no limitations. So it's a wonderful possibility, a wonderful instrument to practice advocacy, that too beyond boundaries. So I would like to move on to my second question, certainly very important question again. It says, how do legal systems impact human rights globally?
Just a question to be asked. And human rights are practiced everywhere in the world in different stages and different perspectives. Now, the ones that are practiced in the Western countries are different from what we practice and what the African or the South American countries practice, or the Australian and the New Zealand, along with oceanic countries practice. Now, if you see, human rights is one of the essential aspects of living, and they are granted everywhere in the constitution of the world, basically all the countries that are there. And they might not be there into a well-expressed form in some countries, and they might be given the most, impactful, pact or the impactful force in some countries. So if you say that how this can work out, it would be very simple to say that, if you don't have human rights, you don't have, the say to say something to the government, or you don't have the verdict to do something that you want for yourself. I mean, if you don't have the right to live, you don't have the right to do anything. And in law, there's a saying that where there's a right, there is always a remedy. So if the right is there, you'll always have a remedy. Otherwise, you'll have no remedy. It would be like a vacuum between the legal system and the justice system that you want to incorporate in the country.
For letting us know on the legal system impacting human rights globally. And we've also talked about the morphology or the structure of human rights in Western context is very different as compared to our context. And it's overall philosophy and methodology of human rights here in our context and different contexts, like the narratives in developed countries and developing countries certainly differs to a great extent. Thanks a lot for letting us know on that. This is important area we must know. Would like to move on to my third question, important question. What are the biggest challenges in cross-border legal advocacy?
This would be divided into many parts. The first one would be basically the language, as there are a lot of languages that are spoken, and as per the United Nations Charter, there are only 6 languages that they approve as official, including one of them which we speak and nearly half of the world speaks, that's English. Then there's French, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, to go on with, and Spanish. So, the legal system that we have today are only divided into 2. One is the common law system that nearly all the British, countries or the British colonies are still practicing. And the other one is civil or continental law, as they call it. It's practiced more in, the countries like Germany and France, to name a few. So, when we come across any of the aspects when we are dealing with international cross borders, basically in the public international law domain, or criminal law or any other perspective, it is much more difficult to incorporate those things rather than when you come into private international law, which is much more clearer because it's all trade, investment, banking, and all, and you have certain rules and regulations which are already formulated. So even if you come from the other, legal system, either civil or continental or from the common law system, it does not make much of a difference when you are into trade laws and all. But when it comes to public international law, somewhat like maritime law or international criminal law or space law, something where you have some jurisdictional aspects, the clash is there because something would be saying something about it, and some legal system would say something different from the perspective of what they see. Now, one of the examples that I can give you is like in the Nuremberg and Tokyo trial, there had been differences, to name a few, and these were just because of the aspects that they had, the legal systems that they were incorporating upon, and how they looked into the situation. What were the crimes defined by one country and what were the crimes defined by the other? This led to a lot of confusion, as well as some of the formulations were done to give a solution, due to which the ICC was formed after long, deliberation. But if you see today, the international criminal law still have some sort of deficiencies, which could have been, formulated and worked upon if everything would have come unanimously rather than, coming from different parts of the legal system and not incorporating it. So, when we talk about cross-border disputes, it is basically, the legal system that comes first in second into place. And first is the language barrier as well as the culture barriers that we face, because we don't know the country, we don't know the people. And then there are, ups and downs in the legal system. And then there is dispute between the, who is superior, who's not. I would also like to quote another, example about it. I was in UK back then, and there was a small conference for the arbitrational group between UK and Ghana. So in this sort of, conference, it was not even conference, but a meet for 2 or 3 hours. And that time, the Ghanaian people who were the lawyers from, Ghana, as well as who were practicing in UK, said that, we faced a problem while, working with the Britishers or anybody who comes from abroad. I mean, basically from the Western countries, in aspects of arbitrational laws that we look into and arbitrational laws that they look into. Now, arbitration is somewhat like, having a third party settlement or, outside the court settlement, as they say in the layman's language. And when you do it, it's somewhat like, the system that they follow in Ghana is more traditional rather than what they follow in UK, which is much more modern, which might not include your traditions, your, values. But they do it like, okay, we do it, we are done, finished. But in Ghana or in India, it would be like, we try to understand the person, we try to understand the ethics, rules, and then only we formulate it. So there are issues of language, culture, and basically the legal system, which, sometimes becomes a problem. And sometimes even inside the common law system or the civil or the continental law system, there are problems when you go inside a country which had been your colony or which still follows your own system. But, the systems have changed over and due to the process of time. And you don't know where to, get into a single unanimous, decision. That's how it happens. And that is the problem that we face in the world today.
Yeah, thanks a lot letting us know on this biggest challenges cross borders being faced, like in terms of language, culture, tradition, and their own law, international laws, and their contest or maybe culture specific laws or maybe regional specific laws. That's what I figure out. You also talk about like international laws and criminal justice system and different laws operating. And sometimes, as challenge also, we struggle because of language, because of our context, and because of people have different mindsets due to these due to these possibilities that we face across. Thanks a lot. And now I would like to move on to my fourth question, which is certainly an important question. Says, can law alone ensure justice, or do we need social movements? Important question.
Well, law can only give you the way. It's only a pavement of the way, whereas you need social, movements, but not, getting or escalating into somewhat like violence, first of all. Secondly, if you talk about law, it can bring justice only when you have the systems ready. There have been many of these systems which were not ready, and transition were needed, like United Nations Security Council has much of the power in the United Nations, as everybody knows that. And you see that whenever you have power, you need to control it. So whenever the United Nations Security Council had done something, there was no solution how to redevelop that situation or how to make amendments when the country was, or the people, or a territory was having some problem. They went over there, they solved the problem, and they came out, but they did not know how to redevelop it. So in those cases, law is needed. Social movements are equally important these days because they are something which is a right. It's covered under right to freedom of speech and expression, and everybody has to express themselves to make the government or the authorities understand that this is what the problem is and you should look into it. Somewhat like water or sanitation, food, health, etc., etc., as it comes along the way. And if you see that social movements have been the greater cause for making a revolution come into a successful one, and it has also been one which has turned violent, and it made a lot of turmoils in one or the other situations in the territories or areas encountered upon. And law can make the finishing touch is always the law, as you see it in every country and every part of the world. If you don't have law, it would be like you're just breaking rules and you're just making something and then again changing it. It's somewhat like an amendment or draft. But if you have a law, it becomes a mandate for the future. It's somewhat like a rock edit where you have something written and it cannot be changed. And it needs initial steps from the social movement and initial steps from the the legal people who are there to understand that no, if you sit in the four walls with ACs, or if you sit in developed countries, you do not understand the situation, what is going on ground. So you need lawyers, you need people who are on ground and who can tell you that these are the situations and this is what you should know into. For example, right now, recently we had three of the most important 21st century, debates, not debates, actually the cases that went into ICJ, the International Court of Justice, including Rohingya, Myanmar, Ukraine, Russia, and Gaza Strip and Israel. Now, in these three cases, you might have noticed that it was basically the people who were missing, and the lawyers were not, or the barristers, to be honest, were not, getting into the main question rather than going into, the initial stuff that we have not done this, we have not done that. Everybody knows that. Right now, the social media has grown so further into this, cyberspace, that they know what is happening, what is not happening. But the reality that should be told in the court was not, given or quoted upon. So I think that sometimes social movements are needed, and it will help, to develop few, the decisions upon and judgments to go in the future. One of them that was there was in Rwanda. Basically, it was a gachacha movement, and I'm not sure that I'm spelling it properly or not, but it was gachacha, and it was a small movement which stated that you should forgive the people who have done something wrong with you and move on to develop the nation. However, it was done in like a panchayat like situation where they had people surrounding the area and they were taught about developing the country, etc., etc. It was somewhat like a open court, outside the court settlement sort of situation. And I think that it was one of the situations where social movement thought that okay, we should come together rather than fighting with either each other or killing each other, and try to develop a nation. So it was somewhat like a law along with a social movement which got together and made Rwanda to come up after a civil war that broke out over there. And it should be somewhat like this everywhere in the countries. Like even Nepal had one of these situations where the Maoist government, Maoist people became the government of the country and tried to help the country grow. And it's somewhat like Afghanistan as well right now, which has now turned into something more upon it's just touching more upon the things which the government were not doing before. There might be faults, there might be goods as well, but we are just trying to be neutral and saying that there are movements which can help your country to grow, and there are systems that can help you to make the things come in a proper way, and that is law as well.
Thanks a lot throwing lights on this important area. Law in isolation for me, like as per your narratives and explanations, is like seem a little handicapped, and there must be a simultaneous war of law versus like social movements. That's what I figure out. So it's important, both things, both the areas important. Law is very very important, but nothing will happen in isolation. Social movements are also important, but nothing much can happen in isolation. It's like, as a ship without an ocean, as a train without a track, or as an airway without a runway. So I would say a law without some sort of social movement mechanism. That's what I figure out. So important. Thanks a lot. Would like to move on to my fifth question or wrap up question. It says like, how do digital platforms influence legal activism?
Well, if you see this, it's very simple. These days, the social media has impacted a lot of lives, and now everybody carries a smartphone. Basically, not everybody, but at least 75% of the population around the world knows what is internet, and they are trying to get information as much as they can. However, I would like to quote that over here. Many aspects of internet are not right. There might be false information as well, and there might be the truth in the information, but you have to get more educated on those factors. So when you see legal issues happening around the world or in India, basically, or the basic issues that we are facing right now would be either political issue that we have with something or the other, the contesting with the election commission, or the borders issue or something like this. In the neighboring countries, we have issues with the borders or the country's government rapidization or collapsation. Then in the world, we have the three wars still going on, but up to some extent, it has been just a neutral one. They are trying to have a ceasefire, somebody's killing somebody and this and that. So sometimes you get the information from one side. So I would like to say that whenever you are trying to browse and surf upon the internet, try to get the picture from all the angles rather than one, to understand what the picture is, and then to understand how legally a person can interpret it. Now, many things have been there where we do not know the situation, and we just try to comment on something which is just coming to our heart. I know that you have the right to express yourself as per Article 19 of the Indian Constitution or in the United Nations Charter. But when you, not in the United Nations Charter, but in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I would like to say that if you are trying to express yourself, try to do it with much more sense. If you are trying to be on internet, or if you are trying to talk to somebody who's in the surrounding or in your peer group, or even in your company or you're working at, sometimes it might give you a small sense of being aligned with one of the parties rather than knowing the whole picture. I faced this problem once when I was in UK, and the war broke out between Ukraine and Russia. It was just the starting of it, and I felt that the media was only showcasing something which is beneficial for them rather than the other side. Then I met a person who was having some contacts in Russia as well, and who was there for 20 years living in Russia, a British person. So he told me that the picture is a bit different from what they are showing over here in Britain, because Russian side will also face some problems and the Ukrainian sides were also facing some problems, but they only showed the Ukrainian problem rather than the Russian problem. So you are biased, and you should not always be biased. There are issues that the social media shows very correctly and aptly. There are issues that are a fake one, or it is only aligned to one side. I should say that you should not always look on one-sided issues. Even though you align with something, you should have a clear picture, a 360 angle of the picture before you ever get into some sort of conclusion. And social media is a good means to know and understand things which were not there present before. You had to have books, you have to have records. Now you have everything on your fingertips. So try to use it as much as possible and try to explore it rather than being aligned to one side. Try to get the whole picture and then try to bring out the solutions That would be the best cause and best way to use the social media. And law also does like that only. However, there are faults right now because the law systems in some countries are not working properly, and in some countries it is so developed that it works properly, but due to political and some alignments or the policy that they are foreign policy issues, they do not get into the proper sense that they want to make. And certainly with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the things are very much clear, but it needs to be more purified. It's not into this pure stage to tell the people that this is what has happened and this is what has not happened. When it comes to the social media, the reports that have been coming up right now, like in YouTube, if you search ICJ case for Gaza and this is South Africa versus Israel, you come to know that this is what has happened. But they are not telling you what was this situation, why this happened, what was the cause for it, what made these things happen, who was at fault, were the innocent people who were killed were at fault, what are the claims and damages that they should get, etc., 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 and what are the solutions that you can offer right now. Is the demolition of Gaza one of the issues to be taken into consideration? It's just an example for the moment. It's nothing that I can come into and I can play, but it's something that can be asked. Why is why did the system have been neutralized at this point of time when there was a holiday in Israel? I mean, there are some questions that they should logically understand and ask before getting into the decisions and making, okay, this is what and this is what. However, the social media has one defect which I have seen. It only creates sympathy but not empathy, and that is the main problem that I have seen. That since the wars are going on, there have been no solutions from the internet seekers or the tech savvy guys who are into internet, that there should be a petition or there should be something to the government of their countries to work upon to make the war stop, or to give something to a country which is lacking in it, or to help a country which has gone through a flood or deficit or even droughts. There have been no such humanitarian efforts which the social media has created. Even a letter would have worked. I know that there are people who cannot financially do anything, but a letter or even something that the government would have worked into, that would have helped the legal and the technical services to work properly and make something happen which was not possible before. So I guess that there are flaws and there are good things as well. Law works with technology now, as everything is printed as well as it's given on internet. You find anything on internet. The legal things are basically what is the last and the finishing touch to any of the aspects that you look into. So I think social media and law is another one aspect of getting into parallel run with the social justice, social movement and justice along with law. I just wanted to add something to the last context that I said.
Yeah.
There is something known as jury system, as you might have seen or watched in one of the movies of Akshay Kumar, isn't it? That I plead not guilty. So I was talking to somebody in UK about it, that how do you become a jury member and all. They say that we are just common people. We are just asked to serve as a jury member. We are just doing all sort of jobs, or jobs rather than a legal job, or having a legal base. So over there I've seen that, and the experience told me that the criminal who's been accused of something is much more given empathy, and he's been or she's been released rather than being behind the bars, just because the jury thinks that no, this cannot happen and this cannot happen. So it's one of the examples that I'm sharing. And it was so funny for me that people who do not understand law, who are coming from all other backgrounds, how can the barristers or the solicitors over there pursue them to make an acquittal of an accused without any reasons?
Mhm. Yeah.
And in India, we see that there are acquittals of the accused, but it's still under a process of pressuring the person to at least say something.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, your presence on this platform. You've talked about like advocates beyond boundaries, and then you've also talked about human rights contacts globally. Biggest challenges also. Law in isolation would not help. That's what you talked about, like social movements to be accompanied, and digital platform like uh, social media should not be just a social media. As per my understanding, it should be a genuine media. So that's the call, because we, as you've already spoken, those are very powerful lines, that social media creates sympathy but doesn't make any empathy. So that must happen. And we see a lot of wrong portrayals also, whereas like my understanding is accused is portrayed as plaintiff or complainant happens to be as accused. So that's one of the problem with social media as well. But you also talked about the major things, the reality is not being covered by mainstream medias. So that also becomes one of the problem, as you've shared your experience out there in UK. So this is really important. So thanks a lot once again joining Reso platform, as you're already familiar about the platform of Reso. Reso is like we are trying to step through the noise to pause your most relevant and reliable sociological narratives and explanations, covering different domains and expertise. It may be human rights, human trafficking, environmental challenges, marine systems, or different core sciences, or any domain. But we just try to look sociological textures and kind of perspectives. So if we are covering today law, so we are also trying to hunt and sort of look for some sociological possibilities, and so that we can move forward. So once again, thanks a lot joining us from Delhi, and your narratives, your explanations have been really royal. As your name says, you're royal. So thank you so much joining us from Delhi, sir.